and we'll begin with formal debate after this conference. Thank you. Go ahead, Alessandro, you may start.
So good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to the simulation of United Nations organization. It's a real pleasure for me to be here, and I hope my short presentation will help you in order to adopt some resolution in this Economical and Social Council of United Nations. At the end of the presentation, please feel free to ask me anything you may want. If it's okay for you, I will start sharing my presentation that I already sent to you. So if you will have it, you can check it. As you will see, it's we are trying to analyze some theoretical concepts that I hope will be useful for you in order to adopt your resolution. It may be a general resolution, it can be a specific resolution for your country. So we will start trying to analyze broader, narrower concepts of peace, security, and conflict or war that are the base in order to try to achieve this sustainable peace through peace building process. And at the end of the presentation, I will try to give you some specific tools in order to analyze the situation of the country and the specific problem that you can find in different post-conflict situations. So let's start with what is peace. First of all, we must think about peace not only as the absence of war or fighting, meaning that peace is not only the end of what we call direct and visible violence. We achieve peace when all people, all communities in the country participate and try to manage the situation after conflict in their country, and they try to solve difference among them without violence, while making equitable progress in their lives and in the life of the community. So we start with thinking about peace in a complex process that has two dimensions, according to Galton. That is, the peace, as I said before, is not just negative. It does not have just a negative dimension, meaning that its peace is not only the absence of visible violence, but we must fix as our objective peace as a positive concept, as a long process that we can achieve in at least 10 or 15 years, but sometimes in 20 or 30 years. Peace is a multidimensional process that must try to eradicate what we call cultural and structural violence in society, meaning all this economical, social, political, or ethnical competition and discrimination that we have among people in a society. An example of structural violence can be the wage or salaries difference among men and women for the same job. This is an inequality that is eradicated in the system and that provides discrimination that we must fight. We must also in this direction, we must think in peace as a necessary process that must try to solve material and immaterial factors that cause violence and conflict in a society. So as we said before, in the first time, we must try to have negative peace, but in a second phase, that what you should do with your resolution is trying to build a positive and sustainable peace. As you can see in this image here, we have at least 5 dimensions that are interrelated the one with the others in order to achieve a peaceful society and a durable peace. So we must think about justice, safety or security, the distribution of power, the quality in income and assets, and also we must focus about well-being of all groups that create a society. So in this slide, you can see these are the very important questions that you should try to answer in your resolutions when you try to achieve sustainable peace and development for a country? First of all, you should focus on power relations, and you must ask yourself if all decisions that you're taking in a peace building process are taking consideration interest of all groups or all communities inside a state or a society or in a determined context. You must also think if the political mechanism that you're trying to fix in order to have political participation of society are broadly accessible to all, and that there are no limitations or discriminations because of gender, ethnicity, class, or any other identitarian factor, immaterial factor. You should also try to understand if there are open relationships among groups in the society and also between citizens and authority. If you don't have open relationships, you should try to build ones by consulting all groups that belong to this society. And in the second place, and this is very important, you should also focus on economy, because if we don't have economical development, we cannot have social development, and we cannot build a sustainable peace. So you must ask yourselves if livelihood and savings opportunities are broadly open to all people. I repeat, without any discrimination because of gender, ethnicity, etc., etc. The third question that you should pose and try to fix in your resolution is try to achieve safety and security for all groups. You must especially focus on discriminated groups or groups that have been more affected by violence, by direct and structural violence. This cannot be easy, especially in the first time of a post-conflict process, but you must really think about that. We cannot have peace if we don't have security. You need security in order to have peace, and you need peace in order to have the security. So these are two concepts that are interrelated. The fourth area of work with your resolution is justice. You must be sure that all people, all groups have equal access to mechanisms of justice. Justice must be transparent and democratic. Sometimes it can be really difficult to achieve because post-conflict context register so much corruption that is very difficult to eradicate. And the fifth area that you should take into account is especially related with the second one, that is well-being. You must achieve well-being, meaning health, education, and decent living environment for all groups, especially with groups that suffer discrimination in society. So these are these 5 peace factors that you should take into account. And I repeat, these are the questions or the problems that you should try to solve with your resolution and with your debate. As I said before, we cannot think about peace if we don't take into account security. And in this presentation, I decided to give you a special definition of security. I'm not thinking about state or military traditional security. I'm thinking about this approach that United Nations established in 1994 that is called human security. Human security means putting individuals and people in the center of security policies of the state. This is really important, specifically in post-conflict situations. Think about human security as a multidimensional process that has 7 sometimes overlapping dimensions that must always be taken into account as interrelated. So the first dimension that we talked before is economic security. You should focus on how you eliminate poverty and unemployment, especially young unemployment. The second dimension is food or alimentary security that should focus on eradication of hunger. Third dimension is health security, that sometimes is really complicated objective to achieve in some post-conflict areas. You should try to eradicate at least mortal infectious disease. Actually, you should try to eradicate all infectious disease in a context or malnutrition or lack of access to basic sanitary resources. That is very difficult to achieve in some very violent or warlord areas, for example. Fourth dimension, that is an objective that all the world should try to achieve, is environmental security. So you should focus how you fight against degradation, deforestation, and depletion of natural resources, pollution, and natural disasters. We know that respecting environment can be sometimes more expensive in terms of politics that states and institutions must adopt, but is basic if we want to achieve sustainable peace. Fifth dimension, is political security, that should be your priority during the first phase of post-conflict process. That means the elimination of military and police repression, especially, or human rights abuse, especially freedom of press, speech, and vote. It's necessary that we achieve political security, and especially the end of repression and corruption, in order to establish trust among communities that mistrust or don't trust the one with the others because of conflict between them that we had before. Sixth dimension, remember that we're talking about human security, is personal security, meaning that you must focus in the protection of individuals, not depending on the group that they are part of. So you should try to eliminate physical violence in the first time, but also trying terrorism, domestic violence, and child labor. So as you can see, this can be short-term, but also mid-term or long-term objectives. And the seventh dimension, and the last one, but not the less important, of course, is community security, meaning security of communities of people that live in the society. You should focus in the protection with your resolution of traditions, cultures, languages, and common or traditional values that all community have. And also you should try to eliminate, but it can be very difficult, sometimes impossible, all tensions and conflicts, crises that you have among communities because of ethnicity, religion, or other identitarian factors. So, if we are adopting narrower, broader definitions of peace and security, we must focus or try to analyze conflict also as a different process, perhaps, that we were thinking about before this presentation. As I said before, war is not only the existence or direct violence. We must try to analyze and to solve a conflict as looking at it as a triangle, as a complex process that is made of three elements that are violent conducts of the actors, of communities, of people in this society context or statewide context, or depending on the context, evidently. Of course, people or communities have violent conducts because they have an incompatibility, meaning that there is something regarding their objectives and ambitions that make impossible to reach an agreement among them. And of course, the problem, especially of long conflicts or frozen conflicts, is the negative attitude of the actors involved towards the end of violence. So we have, just for resuming, violent conducts due to an incompatibility among groups or actors that do not want to change their negative or violent attitude towards the resolution of the conflict. So according to Rafael Grasser, who is also a professor at UAB in Barcelona, we must see the conflict as a triangle, and we must take into account, especially in your resolution, because you must be very concrete and specific and practical, is that we have, in every conflict, we may have something that is negotiable and something that is not negotiable. And we just must try to achieve at least tolerance among groups. Negotiable interests are the material elements of the conflict. They can be easier to achieve because they take into account the distribution of political and economical power, or the access to resources, or the control of territory. Sometimes it can be very difficult to achieve the agreement on control of territory, but you can try to negotiate that with actors, and sometimes you should even put some pressure as an international organization on actors in order to achieve agreement about at least the negotiable interests. Why? Because the immaterial elements of the conflicts are not negotiable. When we talk about identity, ideology, emotions, or perceptions of people and groups, it's impossible to achieve an agreement. So, as I said before, you must try to adopt a resolution that at least guarantees well-being and acceptance among groups, tolerance for other ideology, identities, factors, or emotions. At least this is the base. And so we are at ECOSOC in United Nations Organization, so we must focus especially on social and economical areas for peace building, because we must work about that. We are not a Security Council, so we are not talking about military stuff. We must understand that if we want to build a sustainable peace, we must achieve social and economical development that is sustainable. That means that it stays along years. We have here at least 4 dimensions of economical development. Please take into account that you can add in your resolution any dimension that you think it's necessary or it's useful for your context or the state that you're debating about. So the first dimension is the decent livelihoods, meaning that they must be accessible to all people, to all community, from all sectors of society. You must try to eliminate any exclusion, any inequality among people. You should try to maximize social mobility, and you should try to promote resilience of society. Cannot be easy, especially if cities have been destroyed during the violent conflict, but it's something that you should take into account. The second, it's the more financial dimension is capital. People must be sure that they can accumulate assets securely, that they can have a cushion in time of need. Think that we are living in a pandemic, so it's really important that families, that houses can have, as we said, incomes or money savings in order to invest and to improve their economy, or to use them if they need that. If people are more economically empowered, it's easier for them to say no to politicians or warlords that try to foment violence. The third dimension that is related to the second one is the system of revenue and services that state institutions must provide to all communities. So we must try to create legitimate authorities balanced among groups in the society, among community in the society, that must be able to collect sufficient tax revenues in order to invest them in infrastructures or in services, state services, in order them to redistribute money among all groups in the society. If we redistribute money in an equal way in society, it will be easier to stay or to maintain a sustainable peace. And we can avoid that people try to use violence in order to collect money or to become richer. The fourth dimension, we already talked about that, is environmental and social sustainability. So we must have a sustainable development, especially now that we are passing, or some areas of the world are already passing this pandemic, this complicated pandemic for all social and economical groups in our society. Respecting environment helps building positive peace attributes in society. We must focus, as I say here in the last part of the slide, we must focus also in transparent and effective governance, not only by authorities and institutions of the state, but also by including actors from civil society. Not only national civil society, like the people or communities, but also from international civil society, like trying to include actors like NGOs, for example. And following this logic of the necessity of sustainable economic and social development, you must also try to think about the negative part. You must also take this negative perspective in order to adopt your resolution. You have 3 specific categories of risk factors that you must address in your resolutions. First, as I said, is the problem of low income, because lower incomes makes easier for rebels to recruit among population, because recruiting is cheaper for them. Also, think that poor economic performance increases grievances and mistrust among communities. You must try to fix some national, especially international mechanism in order to receive international aid, financial aid. You must try to redistribute it among the groups that are part of the society. And also think about inequalities. You must try to eliminate all inequalities that you had in the conflict situation, in the pre-conflict situation and context. So this is the second part. It's a really important message, I think, for international community. United Nations Organization has been very critical with itself regarding this necessity about the adoption of a coherent and multidimensional approach in order to achieve sustainable peace, with the participation of state institutions, national civil society, especially including marginalized groups, and also, as I said before, NGOs or other actors that come from international civil society. Here in this second part, you see that you must focus on the 4 dimensions about what needs to be done. It's not important how or who does things, but it's important what you should do. And here I put some example of specific problem or assumptions that you will have probably to fix, to solve with your resolution, with your debate. If you want to think about security, you should think at least in reinsertion of ex-combatants, IDP, that is internally displaced person. What do you do with refugees, with the security sector reform, that is SSR, or with DDR, that is what you do with disarm, demobilization, and reinsertion in society of ex-combatants. The second dimension can be very complicated sometimes, is what do you do in order to achieve reconciliation among parts of an older conflict. So what do you do with justice and reconciliation? You must fix inequalities, you must establish the absolute rule of law, and sometimes some transitional justice regimes, like using sometimes commissions of truth and reconciliation, that are a tool that have been used in different parts of the world, in all continents, we may say. You must also focus, as we said before, in social and economic well-being. You will have so many problems in different contexts to solve. Yes, it's just a list, but there are not all the possible problems. You may find some new ones. You must think about what you do with critical infrastructure, with private investors that you will need, together with public investors, national or internationals. What do you do with young people employment, that are a collective, a group that is always affected by conflict. And you must also focus on how you establish markets for commodities, service, and labor. How do you think to proceed with privatizations and liberalizations of the market? How do you achieve efficient external aid, meaning how do you spend money in an efficient way? You will receive money from the international community. How do you spend it in efficient, I repeat, and fast way? And also, as we said before, the third dimension is governance and political participation. You must rebuild multi-level institutions, starting for the individual one to the local one, and you must achieve also state institutions and institutions that try to have dialogue also with international community. You must achieve, sometimes it can be very complicated, equal representation of political actors, or you should fight against corruption that sometimes it's impossible because corruption is in all of the part of the system. You must reform the constitutions, political parties, sometimes you must achieve political decentralization. You should not leave the place of decision just in one city in the country. And here, this is even more specific. Here, this is just a tool in order to analyze the political economy of peace building, meaning that you must focus on this economical part of building peace. I think this image is very useful because helps you to establish a classification of different institutions and actors that you must take into account, that you must help participate in your peace process. And we take two criteria: formality and tangibility. So, for example, you can see that some of the most formal and tangible actors, of course, are government, departments, parliament, courts of justice, etc., etc. But you see here in less formal that you must also take into account what do you do with criminal gangs, what do you do with informal savings groups, what do you do with neighborhood self-help schemes that sometimes are really strong in a society. You must also fix less tangible but formal assumptions, like what do you do with citizenships, what do you do with human rights, what do you do in order to educate people that they must pay taxes in order the state to collect the money and redistribute them. Sometimes it can be very difficult to educate, repeat, society in some groups, especially if they feel that they've been discriminated before during the conflict. And in order to finish before the conclusion, here you have a specific approach of peace building. So what do you think when you're talking about peace building? That is the process that you should try to organize in a post-conflict situation. We can think about peace building as using the 3R approach. That is, meaning you must achieve resolution, reconstruction, and reconciliation among parts of groups of society. You must solve problems and incompatibilities that we talked before. You must reconstruct not only the material, but also the immaterial factors that have been destroyed during violence and conflict. And you must try to achieve reconciliation through right to justice, truth, and reparation among groups. So we must see the conflict, if we take this peace building approach, as a complex process that is not only negative, because in conflict we have so many energies that communities have. So we must be able to transform conflict as a phenomenon or a process that creates positive energy among communities, not only as a negative process. We must transform the conflict and not only try to eliminate it. That means that you must try to, with your resolution, with your decision, you must try to stimulate, for example, positive competition among actors for work, access to some resources. You must stimulate creativity and curiosity, because you must promote change of mentalities. If you want to achieve positive peace, sustainable peace, you must change this violent mentality, this schemes of divisions that you have among communities. You must try to change relations among them in order to convert them in some deeper, in some relations that are more positive, more peaceful among parts of the society. You must try, sometimes very difficult, sometimes it's impossible because actors don't want to do that. You must try to change perception of enmity among groups of society. You must also use and try to help or to make stronger multi-level diplomacy, meaning that is diplomacy that not only comes from the top to the bottom, meaning from the state to people, but also that has a bottom-up dynamic, meaning that people and communities are actors that can take decisions that help the state to organize political life. Also think about the multi-track or what we call parallel diplomacy, meaning there is a diplomacy that at the same time involves state, communities, citizens, firms, NGOs, religious organizations or institutions, and media. You must take all important actors of the society and try to involve them in negotiations for peace. And just as a conclusion, this is just a resume of what we've seen, and I hope is just to make it clearer for you. We must adopt, as we said, broader definitions of peace, security, and conflict. We saw that they're complex process, long-term processes that are essential in order to achieve sustainable peace and socio-economical development. Think in peace not only as a negative process, but also as a positive process. That means the elimination of structural or cultural violence in a society. Think about security in terms of human security. Put people in the middle of your decisions, of your policies, of your resolutions. Think not only about material factors, but also about immaterial factors, identities, perceptions, and emotions that groups have. And what do they think the one about the other? Remember that building peace means start different processes. Peace as conflict and security is a multidimensional process. Think that you must adopt a multi-level approach, starting from the individual one until the state one, and think about peace also like a synonym of economical and social sustainable development, when civil society is absolutely essential in order to achieve your objectives. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandro, for your presentation. And I believe that this will have been really useful for our delegates and for the discussion that they will be having today and tomorrow.